Camille Johnson stepped into Bistro Nouveau, her heels tapping gently on the gleaming marble floor. The restaurant buzzed with soft conversations, clinking wine glasses, and background jazz, exuding an upscale intimacy she usually enjoyed. Tonight, however, a slight discomfort settled in her stomach. Matthew, her husband, was running late from a meeting and had encouraged her to order ahead. Yet, sitting alone at a corner table, she questioned that decision. She glanced around at the elegantly dressed patrons scattered throughout the restaurant. Their laughter and chatter blended effortlessly with the music. As she adjusted her seat, a waiter approached. Tall, blonde, and dressed in the restaurant's uniform, his name tag read Ethan. He offered no smile or warm greeting, barely making eye contact. "Ready to order?" Ethan asked, his tone indifferent. Camille hesitated, caught off guard. "Could I just get some water for now? I'll order later." Ethan jotted something down, expression unchanged. "Sure," he replied, turning away swiftly. Camille watched as Ethan moved to another table, greeting the middle-aged couple there with a warm laugh and quickly refilling their wine glasses. His demeanor was noticeably different, more engaging. She tried to dismiss the feeling that something was amiss. Perhaps he was just having a rough day. "Running a little late, babe. Order whatever you like. Be there soon," she replied quickly, glancing up to see Ethan attending to a large group by the window. Her glass of water still hadn't arrived. She crossed her arms, her unease growing. 5 more minutes passed without any sign of her water. Camille shifted uncomfortably, noticing the smooth service at other tables. A knot of tension formed in her chest. She flagged down another waitress, Sarah, who had always been polite. "Excuse me," Camille said calmly but firmly. "I've been waiting for some water. Could you bring me a glass, please?" Sarah looked surprised and apologetic. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll bring it right away." As Camille waited, she felt the weight of other patrons' glances. The knot of tension tightened. This wasn't just about the water. It was something she had encountered too many times before. Still, she pushed the thought aside, waiting for the service she deserved. When Sarah returned with her water, Camille thanked her quietly, watching as Ethan continued to serve other tables with ease, ignoring her presence. She sipped the cold water, but it did little to cool her rising frustration. Whatever was happening tonight, it was more than just a bad day for a waiter. Camille took another sip, her eyes fixed on Ethan as he moved effortlessly around the restaurant. He poured wine, refilled glasses, and engaged in light conversation with everyone but her. His smile was warm and welcoming, except when it came to her. The more she watched, the more her unease solidified into something heavier. This wasn't just slow service or lack of attention. It felt deliberate. Her fingers tapped lightly on the glass as she contemplated her next move. Should she say something? Was she overreacting? Familiar doubts crept in. 20 more minutes passed and still Ethan hadn't returned to take her order. The restaurant was getting busier, but that didn't excuse his complete avoidance of her table. A new group arrived at a nearby table, and Ethan was there within moments, taking their orders with charm and energy he hadn't shown her. Camille straightened in her chair, raising her hand slightly to catch his attention. Ethan's eyes flitted past her, making no acknowledgement. He turned his back, and Camille's lips pressed into a thin line, her patience wearing thin. She glanced at her phone, wondering how much longer Matthew would be. Her stomach growled, a reminder that she hadn't even ordered yet. Taking a deep breath, she decided to flag Ethan down the next time he passed. She was done sitting quietly and being ignored. As soon as he reappeared from the kitchen, she raised her hand again. This time, there was no way he could miss her. "Excuse me?" she called out, her voice louder, her tone firm. Ethan paused, turning toward her with a blank expression. He approached her table, and for a moment, Camille hoped she had been overthinking the situation. but the look in his eyes as he neared her made her second-guess that hope. "What can I get you?" he asked flatly, no trace of the warmth he had shown to every other table. Camille blinked, her frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "I'd like to place my order, please. I've been waiting for quite some time." Ethan shrugged slightly. "We've been busy." Camille's eyebrows lifted, her frustration turning into disbelief. She glanced around the restaurant again, watching Ethan move effortlessly between the other tables. Busy? Sure, but not too busy for everyone else. She kept her tone measured, not wanting to escalate things too quickly. "I've noticed you've been able to attend to the other tables without any issue. Is there a reason I've been sitting here for nearly 30 minutes without even having my order taken?" Ethan shifted on his feet, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Maybe you're just being sensitive." Camille's grip on her glass tightened, but she kept her composure. She had heard variations of this line before, accusations that her experiences were imagined, that her feelings were invalid. She wasn't about to let this slide. "Sensitive?" she repeated, her voice low but sharp. "I'm asking for the same service you're providing to every other customer in here. I don't think that's being sensitive." Camille sat in silence, her frustration simmering as the minutes ticked by. Ethan hadn't returned since taking her order, and the restaurant bustled around her, yet she felt isolated, ignored. She glanced at her watch. 45 minutes had passed since Ethan scribbled down her order, with no food, no updates, and no sign of him. The clinking of plates and murmured conversations filled the air. Nearby tables were showered with attention, as servers brought out dish after dish, drinks constantly refilled. A sense of disbelief washed over her. How could someone in a place like this get away with such blatant disregard? Her patience had officially run out. She flagged down Sarah, the waitress who had brought her water earlier. Sarah approached quickly, her face etched with concern. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with genuine worry. Camille sighed, trying to keep her voice steady despite her growing anger. "I've been waiting over an hour now. I ordered the house special and I still haven't received any food. Can you check with the kitchen for me, please?" Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I'm so sorry. That's definitely not normal. Let me see what's going on." Sarah rushed off toward the kitchen, leaving Camille to stew in her frustration. She clenched her jaw, watching as other tables received their meals without issue, all while she sat there, forgotten. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, but underneath that, a deeper feeling started to bubble up, something closer to anger. This wasn't just bad service, it was intentional. A few minutes later, Sarah returned, looking flustered and apologetic. "I checked with the kitchen," she began, nervously clutching the tray she was holding, "and they said they never received your order." Camille's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? How is that possible? Ethan took my order almost an hour ago." Sarah bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I'm really sorry, ma'am. It looks like he never put it in." Camille's pulse quickened, her frustration now bubbling into full-blown anger. She stared past Sarah, toward the kitchen doors where Ethan had disappeared after taking her order. He had deliberately neglected her, again. Camille stood up, her hands resting on the edge of the table. "Can you please get Ethan to come over here?" she asked, her voice calm but with an edge sharp enough to cut through the tension. Sarah nodded quickly and hurried off, clearly eager to avoid further confrontation. Camille watched her go, feeling the eyes of other patrons briefly flick in her direction before turning back to their meals. She knew the looks. They were the kind that appeared when something uncomfortable was happening, but no one wanted to get involved. A minute later, Ethan appeared, walking slowly toward her table, his expression as unreadable as ever. He approached with a slight swagger, as if nothing were wrong at all. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice completely devoid of any genuine concern. Camille stared at him for a long moment, gathering herself. She didn't want to explode, not yet, but she was done being polite. "Yes, there's a problem. You never put my order in." Ethan blinked, his face remaining expressionless. "I'm sure that's a misunderstanding." Camille's eyes narrowed. "A misunderstanding? I've been sitting here for over an hour. You took my order, and now I find out you never even bothered to put it in. You've given every other table exceptional service, but you can't even be bothered to give me the basic courtesy of taking my order? And now you're telling me it's just a mistake?" Ethan's eyes darkened, a flicker of something more dangerous crossing his face. He crossed his arms over his chest, his posture defensive. "If you're going to start accusing me of things, maybe you should just leave." Camille's breath caught, her anger now boiling over. "Accusing you? I'm pointing out exactly what's been happening all night. You've ignored me, treated me like I don't exist, while bending over backward for everyone else. This isn't about a mistake. This is about you thinking you can get away with treating me like this because I'm a black woman sitting alone in this restaurant." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and heavy. The nearby tables had gone quiet, and Camille could feel the weight of the other diners' eyes on her. But she didn't care. She wasn't going to let him brush this off, not when it was so obvious what was really happening. Ethan's face flushed red, and he shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not going to stand here and let you accuse me of being a racist," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "If you don't like this service, maybe you should leave." Camille's fists clenched at her sides, her heart pounding. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I'm paying to be here just like everyone else. You're not kicking me out because you don't like being called out on your behavior." Just as Ethan opened his mouth to respond, the restaurant door swung open, and Camille's eyes shifted toward the entrance. Matthew strode in, his tall figure cutting a commanding presence as he made his way toward their table. Camille's breath caught, and for the first time that night, a sense of relief washed over her. Ethan's face paled when he saw Matthew approaching, and his posture changed instantly. He stood a little straighter, his eyes flicking nervously between Camille and her husband, as if suddenly realizing just how badly he had messed up. Alicia's face went completely still, and Catherine knew she had turned her TV slightly off. Matthew reached their table, his expression calm but his eyes sharp as they locked onto Ethan. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable authority. Camille remained silent for a moment, letting Ethan squirm under Matthew's gaze. She could already see the fear creeping into his expression. As Ethan entered the office, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Gone was the confident, almost cocky demeanor he had displayed the night before. Instead, he looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding direct contact with either Camille or Matthew. He stood there, hands clasped in front of him, waiting for whatever was about to come. Matthew gestured to the chair next to Camille. "Have a seat, Ethan," he said, his voice calm but firm. Ethan hesitated for a moment before complying, sitting on the edge of the chair, as if ready to bolt at any second. Matthew returned to his seat behind the desk, his eyes steady on Ethan, his mouth tightened. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment, a tactic meant to unsettle Ethan even further. It worked. Ethan's hands fidgeted in his lap, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere on the floor. Finally, Matthew spoke. "You know why you're here, right?" Ethan nodded slowly, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "Yes, sir," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Matthew leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I want to hear it from you. What happened last night?" Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes flickering up to meet Matthew's gaze briefly before darting away again. I, I didn't treat Mrs. Johnson the way I should have. I ignored her, didn't take her order properly, and I tried to—" He trailed off, his face flushing with what appeared to be a mix of embarrassment and shame. Camille watched him closely, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. She wanted to hear him admit it, to acknowledge the blatant disrespect he had shown her. Matthew pressed further. He seemed to be struggling to find the right words, or perhaps the courage to say them. I thought I could get away with it. I didn't think she would stand up for herself like that." Camille's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent, letting Matthew handle the interrogation. She could feel the anger simmering just below the surface, but she held it in check, waiting for the right moment. Matthew leaned forward, his voice steady but sharp. "And why did you think you could get away with it, Ethan? Was it because she was alone? Because she was a woman? Or was it because she was black?" Ethan's eyes widened slightly and he looked up at Matthew, a hint of panic in his expression. I didn't what?" Matthew cut him off, his voice harder now. "Didn't think you'd get caught? Didn't think she deserved the same respect as every other customer in my restaurant?" Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, no sound coming out. He looked helplessly between Matthew and Camille, his face pale. Camille finally spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "You made a choice last night, Ethan. You chose to treat me differently based on your own prejudices, and when I confronted you about it, you tried to make it seem like I was the problem." Ethan's eyes flickered to her, and for a moment she thought she saw a glimmer of genuine remorse. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a look of resignation. Matthew continued, his voice measured but unyielding. "Your actions were unacceptable, Ethan. They went against everything this restaurant stands for. We pride ourselves on providing excellent service to every customer, regardless of who they are. You failed to do that last night." Ethan nodded slowly, his head hanging low. "I know, sir. I'm sorry." Matthew studied him for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I believe you are, Ethan, but sorry isn't enough. Your actions have consequences." Ethan looked up, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Matthew sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You're fired, Ethan. Effective immediately." Ethan's face paled even further, his eyes widening in shock. "But sir, I need this job. I can't—" Matthew held up a hand, silencing him. "You should have thought about that before you decided to disrespect my wife and my restaurant. Your behavior was inexcusable, and I won't tolerate it." Ethan looked desperate, his eyes pleading. "Please, sir, I can't lose this job. I have bills, rent." Camille interjected, her voice steady but not unkind. "You should have considered the consequences of your actions before you made those choices, Ethan. What you did was wrong, and you have to face the repercussions." Ethan looked between them, his expression a mix of desperation and defeat. He seemed to realize that there was no arguing his way out of this, no pleading that would change their minds. Matthew stood, signaling that the conversation was over. "You can collect your things and leave. We'll make sure you receive your final paycheck." Ethan stood slowly, his shoulders slumped, the picture of defeat. He hesitated for a moment, as if wanting to say something more, but then thought better of it. With a final nod, he turned and walked out of the office, the door clicking softly shut behind him. Camille exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. It was over. Ethan had faced the consequences of his actions, and justice had been served. She looked up at Matthew, who was watching her with a soft expression. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Camille nodded, managing a small smile. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm glad it's over. Matthew walked around the desk and pulled her into a hug, his arms warm and comforting. You did the right thing standing up for yourself. I'm proud of you. Camille leaned into the hug, feeling the tension of the past days slowly melting away. It had been a difficult experience, but she had stood her ground, and in the end, justice had prevailed. She knew that not every situation would end this way, that not every battle would be won so decisively. But for now, she took comfort in the knowledge that she had fought for what was right, and she had won. As they pulled away from the hug, Camille looked up at Matthew, her eyes determined. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again. Not just here, but anywhere. Matthew nodded, his expression serious. You're right. We'll make sure all the staff are properly trained, that they understand the importance of treating every customer with respect and dignity. Camille smiled, feeling a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about one waiter, one restaurant. It was about setting a standard, about sending a message that discrimination and disrespect would not be tolerated. It was about making a difference, one step at a time. And as she looked into Matthew's eyes, she knew that together, they could do just that. The road ahead might be challenging, but with each other by their side, they could face whatever came their way, and they would do it with courage, with determination, and with love. Ethan nodded, accepting his fate without protest. He stood slowly, his shoulders slumped, and began to make his way out of the office. As he reached the door, he hesitated, turning back to face Camille and Matthew one last time. I really am sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but I want you to know that I regret it. Camille met his gaze, her expression unyielding. It's too little too late, Ethan. Actions have consequences, and you're facing yours now. Ethan nodded again, resignation in his eyes, and then left the office, closing the door softly behind him. The room was quiet for a moment, the tension slowly dissipating. Matthew turned to Camille, his expression softening. You okay? He asked, concern etched on his face. Camille exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the past 2 days lift off her shoulders. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm glad it's over. Matthew reached across the desk, taking her hand in his. You did the right thing, standing up for yourself. I'm proud of you. Camille smiled softly, squeezing his hand. Thanks. I couldn't have done it without you. Matthew smiled back, his eyes warm and supportive. We make a good team, you and I. They sat in silence for a moment, their hands still clasped, finding comfort in each other's presence. Then Camille looked up, determination in her eyes. So, what's next? She asked, her voice filled with resolve. How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Matthew nodded, his expression thoughtful. We need to review our policies and training procedures, make sure all staff understand the importance of treating every customer with respect and dignity. We can't afford to have anyone else slip through the cracks like Ethan did. Camille agreed, her mind already racing with ideas. We should also look into diversity and sensitivity training, make sure everyone is aware of their own biases and how to address them. Matthew smiled, admiration in his eyes. That's a great idea. I'll get on it right away. We'll make sure this restaurant is a safe and welcoming place for everyone. Camille felt a sense of purpose wash over her. This wasn't just about one incident, one person. It was about creating a culture of respect and inclusivity, a place where everyone felt valued and appreciated. I'll help in any way I can, she said, her voice firm. We're in this together. Matthew squeezed her hand, gratitude shining in his eyes. Together, he echoed. Always. As they began to discuss their plans, the office filled with a sense of determination and hope. The road ahead might be challenging, but with each other by their side, they knew they could face whatever came their way. And so, they began the journey of transforming their restaurant into a beacon of inclusivity and respect, one step at a time.